let's get tenants into there. We need to revitalize and see if we can bring grants and state funds into the downtown to make sure that it grows and has a solid look to it, so that it would all flow together. So when you drive through downtown Reading, it looks nice, and there are plenty of businesses and plenty of places for you to go to do your shopping.
Thank you, Mr. Hines. Mr. Jones.
I think what the town of Reading needs for downtown is a comprehensive proposal, and I know the Downtown Steering Committee's worked on it. They've gotten some grant money. They're going to be looking for some additional money. But I think in order to have the variety of businesses you want, and a business is obviously going to make an economic decision to locate, you need to get 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 specialties that are going to locate downtown at one time. And I think that you need a comprehensive plan to do that. You do have to look at signage, you have to look at traffic flows, you have to look at the aesthetics. And I think there's a real opportunity for downtown Reading to grow and expand and be a wonderful place that it once was. And I think it's still a number of fantastic shops. I mean, I shop downtown Reading all the time, and unfortunately not quite as many shops as they used to be.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Hines, 30 seconds.
I wasn't sure if I had heard what Brad's proposal was for the state rep's influence in that area, but I will reiterate mine. The state rep has to be an advocate to the business community as far as bringing new business into each town, and I think that if I'm elected state representative, that will be tops on my list.
Thank you, Mr. Hines. Mr. Feely, your next question, please, to Mr. Jones.
Mr. Jones, this is another question from the North Reading transcript. The North Reading Town Meeting recently transferred municipal land to its housing partnership in an effort to meet state quotas for low-income housing. Since the state set a 10% affordable housing goal for towns like North Reading, shouldn't the state come up with ways to help the town meet this goal?
Well, first of all, town meeting didn't transfer land to the housing partnership. Actually, the vote failed. But yes, the state should come up with things, and that's why they've come up with a comprehensive permitting plan. That's why places on like Plough Avenue, there's a proposal being looked at right now to address that issue. The state does have a role, and there is funding available. And the one housing unit that is coming in, when I was on the Housing Authority, we built 4 low-income housing units on Swan Pond, and we're building one currently right now on Algonquin Road, and hopefully to spin that off and to build another one. But I think we need a little more information when you come back to town meeting, because people are obviously concerned about the type of development that's going to be put potentially in their neighborhood and want some questions, and that's reasonable to have answered up front. But there is a role for the state with funding, permitting, and location.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Hines.
There is a role for the state, but the towns must have a comprehensive plan as far as providing affordable housing for residents. In Reading, we have been providing affordable housing for residents, and I think it's a plan that it helps people become rooted in a community that they might not necessarily be able to become rooted in if they weren't able to take advantage of these programs. I think it's an excellent idea.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hines. Mr. Jones, you have 30 seconds rebuttal.
Yes, and I agree, and I think that's the role of the state representative, is to try to access those funds and help on the local level and deal with those neighborhood issues that always arise when there's something new going on in a neighborhood that may be a little out of the normal character of that neighborhood. And North Reading's made it. So when I was a member of the Housing Authority, I was in the Housing Authority when we created the Housing Partnership, and we've seen that first house come online, and construction is due to start next year. There's also, as I say, the Plough Avenue proposal that would allow for 3 more units of low-income housing.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Feely, your next question, please, to Mr. Hines.
Mr. Hines, this question came in from one of our readers on our message line. As state rep, would you pledge to equally represent all 3 towns in the district?
Yes, I would. I would pledge to support all 3 towns and represent them equally. I think that's part of the problem right now, is we have a state representative that is a sitting selectman and sought re-election to that board as a sitting state rep. And I think that we need to have an even view of all 3 towns and have someone who is not tied to necessarily one community in such a strong way.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hines. Mr. Jones.
Well, Mr. Hines has raised this issue several times, and in 2.5 years he has not been able to point to one thing that I have done or have not done to the benefit of one town over the other. The fact of the matter is I have equally and actively represented all 3 communities, and I find it interesting that he lives with the chairman of the Board of Selectmen, and he doesn't find that as somehow somewhat of a hypocritical view that he's going to be increasingly liable. He sits on the town meeting member in Reading. He sits on the high school governance council. He doesn't view that as an unfair connection to one community over another. I think he needs to put some facts or some meat behind this rhetorical argument that he keeps bringing up.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Hines, 30 seconds.
I think Mr. Jones has to wake up and realize that there obviously is going to be some issues where there will be a conflict of interest. If he doesn't think there's a possible conflict of interest, for him being the chairman of the Board of Selectmen in North Reading, he's living in a land that none of us are living in. We live in a land where it's the real world, and there are conflicts of interest when it comes to people sitting as the chairman of the Board of Selectmen.
Thank you, Mr. Hines. Mr. Feely, please, your next question to Mr. Jones.
Mr. Jones, this is another question from one of our readers. Would you support reducing the sales tax to 3%, and why or why not?
I'd carefully look at reducing the sales tax to 3%, and one of the proposals that I think we need to look at, though, is the initial impact of that is going to be a decline in revenues. So is there an offsetting revenue source while that kicks in? Because I think the economic activity that it creates is going to more than offset the loss. So it's something I would definitely look at. But back to the point of the conflict of interest, Mr. Hines didn't address the conflict of interest of him living at a house with a member of the Reading Board of Selectmen who's going to be lobbying him. I find it interesting that he's not willing to address that yet. In my case, in 2.5 years, he's not pointed out one example where I've done anything or not done anything to the benefit of one community or another.
Mr. Hines.
Well, I would also point out that I am not the sitting member of the Board of Selectmen, and that is my father, who isn't necessarily going to lobby me one way or the other for issues that regards to the town. I believe my father to be a fair man, and I believe that you know, if there becomes an issue where there is a conflict of interest, I will recuse myself. I will recuse myself from any board or office that would require a conflict of interest. I think that you are missing the point, and the point is that there is an image that you have that is there is a conflict of interest. People all over this town always say to me, you know, how can we have a sitting state rep who's also the chairman of the Board of Selectmen in another town? How is that fair?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hines. Mr. Jones, 30 seconds.
Well, I'm sorry Mr. Hines didn't see fit to answer the question that was asked at all. But back onto the conflict of interest. He hasn't responded how, I mean, if there's obviously some kind of an issue, I could recuse myself just easily, but the fact of the matter is, Reading and North Reading and North Andover are similar enough communities that the issue has not arisen. And the record clearly shows, because Mr. Hines hasn't been able to point out one example in 2.5 years to support his accusation that I've done anything to benefit one community or another.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Feely, your next question, please, to Mr. Hines. And gentlemen, I ask that you please do respond to the question that is asked.
Okay, Mr. Hines, this is a follow-up question about the sales tax. Would you support a measure to increase the sales tax if it meant you could reduce the property tax?
The sales tax is probably one of the fairest taxes we have. It's across the board. Everybody has to pay it. I don't necessarily support decreasing it, as my opponent seems to, or increasing it. I think the sales tax is at a level where we can all live with it, and I won't support any raise in any tax if elected state representative.
Thank you, Mr. Hines. Mr. Jones.
No, I wouldn't support increasing the sales tax. It's actually one of the most regressive taxes that we have because it falls disproportionately on lower income people as opposed to higher income people. So no, I wouldn't support that proposal.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Hines, 30 seconds.
I just reiterate, I think that, despite what Mr. Jones says, I think it's one of the fairest taxes we have because it does affect everybody. People that buy items across the board are affected by the sales tax, and I definitely would not support increasing it.
Thank you, Mr. Hines. Mr. Feely, your next question, please, to Mr. Jones.
Okay, Mr. Jones, a reader of the Chronicle felt that rumors have been floating after recent Boston Globe articles that the current administration may not fund matching grants associated with the Education Technology Bond Bill. What could be done to prevent this if those rumors are true?
Well, I know, for instance, actually for a fact that the rumors aren't true because we've been in touch with the Secretary of Administration and Finance, Charlie Baker, and simply the administration's concern is that each community that potentially receives grant money is in a position to utilize it and has a technology plan in place that isn't going to see the money wasted. And I don't think that's unreasonable to say we want to make sure that that money isn't wasted, that we want a responsible plan that utilizes technology to the best benefit of the children involved in place. And I think that's fiscally responsible and educationally responsible, and that money will be coming to the cities and towns.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Hines.
I don't have a problem with looking at technology plans that communities have produced to make that a reason for them to get their money. But towns that do have their technology plans in place and have had them in place should be getting their funding as soon as they can, and not at the expense, and Reading or any other town should not be at the expense of other towns and getting their money. Bond bills are often used by legislators to see that they're bringing home the bacon. I hope that this one comes back. to the towns.
Thank you, Mr. Hines. Mr. Jones, 30 seconds rebuttal.
As a bill that I supported all along and passed, this money will be coming to the cities and towns.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Jones. I would like to take a moment here to remind everybody viewing at home that this is a live call-in show for today, Sunday, October 27th. If you do have a question you'd like the candidates to respond to, please do call in to the studio. The number here is 944-4175. Let me repeat that again, 944-4175. There is a volunteer in the studio to take your call, and we will put your question on the air as soon as there is an opportunity to. So please do call in. Mr. Feely, please, your next question to Mr. Hines.
Okay, Mr. Hines, this next question came from a reader, and it is slightly slanted, but there is a follow-up question that will make it even to both candidates. Right now, there is a breakdown in the House of Representatives of 125 Democrats to 34 Republicans. Do you feel that it is right for a party to have such complete control over a House, or such a slant in the representative?
That's the will of the people, Paul. Each town, each district has their election, and they elect the people that they want to represent them. It so happens that the majority of the districts, they believe that that's the democratic ideal and democratic philosophy that they support. It's not our place to decide whether it's fair or not. It's up to each individual district and each individual voter to decide whether it's fair or not.
Thank you, Mr. Hines. Mr. Jones.
Well, I think as Chip says, that it is up to the individual voters, and that's democracy in action, and it's a matter of running candidates and people voting in who they want. And I'm happy that the voters of this district on 2 previous occasions have chosen to send me to the state legislature, and as a Republican in a democratically controlled legislature, I've been able to achieve a great number of things for my district, and in fact was one of the key votes to elect a Speaker of the House. So a Republican in a democratically controlled legislature can accomplish a great deal. So I think that issue is kind of should be put off to the side and look at the record of the candidates and the ability to interact with people and look at their resumes and their records in terms of being able to do that. So I think that, that's democracy in action, but I would say that it was a restoration of a 2-party system in the state with the election of Governor Weld in 1990 that actually saved the state and got it back on track.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Hines, 30 seconds available for rebuttal.
Well, I think it's interesting that Mr. Jones would bring up Tom Finneran as Speaker. I would like to know if he would support Tom Finneran as Speaker this time around, because I will.
Thank you, Mr. Hines. Mr. Feely, your next question, please, directed to Mr. Jones.
Okay, as a follow-up question on that issue, to try to make it more fair, if Governor Weld were to win the Senate seat and someone like Joe Kennedy or Scott Hochberg were eventually to become governor, do you feel it would be advantageous to have a Republican representative?
I think it's advantageous to have someone who understands the legislative process, has the experience to get things done, and I think I'm that candidate. I mean, you're talking about an issue that's 2 years down the road, so I guess maybe that would be better put in 2 years. But I really think that it's up to the individual representative, because when you get in the legislature, quite often R&D goes off to the side. You're a representative first and foremost for 38,000 people, give or take, and that's your first priority. Not being a Republican and not being a Democrat, it's being an effective representative for the 38,000 people you represent.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Hines.
I agree. The issue is 2 years off. Obviously, I would insist that a Democrat can get more done in a democratically controlled legislature because they have access to the leadership that the Republicans don't. And again, I would reiterate that I would vote for Tom Finneran for Speaker. I think he's done a great job. I think he's got the right attitude as far as taxes are concerned, and a fiscal responsible Democrat that I would like to model my state representative career after.
Thank you, Mr. Hines. Mr. Jones, 30 seconds.
Well, I'm happy that my opponent has seen the light on being anti-tax after being a supporter of the graduate income tax 2 years ago, and I'm pleased to be endorsed by the Citizens for Limited Taxation, which is the most preeminent group, anti-tax group and tax control group in the state. Yes, I will vote for Tom Finneran again for Speaker, as I had in the past, and quite honestly, if it wasn't for the Republican Party, the Tom Finneran that you want to emulate would not be Speaker of the House right now. So I'm very proud of that vote.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones. Our next question will come from a member of our viewing audience, and this question will be first directed to Mr. Hines. Yes, could you please direct your question to Mr. Hines
Yes,
first?
it's a question about the candidates' qualifications. I would specifically like to know their academic background in great detail. The reason for that is that 2 years ago, Mr. Jones's campaign literature stated that he had been educated at the Johns Hopkins University. My husband and I were very interested in this because we are both alumni of Johns Hopkins, which is the smallest university in the country, and yet neither of us remembers him. And